Today we're diving into one of history's most unusual partnerships. We're talking about the deep and, honestly, pretty surprising link between the world of a soldier and the world of a fraternal brotherhood. It's really a story about how you balance your duty to your country with your commitment to all of humanity.
I mean, think about it. On one hand, you have a Mason's apron. It's a symbol of peaceful work, of building things, of equality. And on the other hand, a soldier's sword. That's all about conflict, discipline, and power. They seem like polar opposites, right? So what in the world could possibly connect them? That's the big question we're going to unpack here.
Well, the man who really gave us the language to understand this was Robert Freke Gould, and he was the perfect person for the job because he literally lived this paradox. He was a lieutenant in the British Army, served all over the world, and then became maybe the most important historian of Freemasonry ever. His big idea, which he called Freemasonry under arms, is going to be our guide.
All right, so here's our game plan. We'll start by digging into what the apron and the sword really represent. Then we'll see how the study of this whole topic got a major reality check. After that, we'll look at the ingenious lodges that literally traveled with armies, see their huge impact across the globe, hear some incredible stories of mercy in battle, and finally, wrap up with what it all means today.
Okay, so let's start with that core idea, the apron, right? It comes from the actual stonemasons of the Middle Ages, and it stands for the value of hard work and the principle that inside the lodge, everyone's on the same level. The sword, well, that's the soldier's tool of the trade. It's a symbol of duty, of hierarchy, of defending your nation. And military Freemasonry is where these two powerful, clashing ideas smash together.
Now, what's really fascinating is that before we can even get into the history itself, we have to talk about how the telling of that history got a complete overhaul. For centuries, Masonic history was, let's be honest, kind of a mess of romantic myths and unproven legends. But that all changed in the late 19th century.
You basically had two competing approaches. There was the imaginative school, which loved a good story, tracing the fraternity's roots back to ancient Egypt or King Solomon, but without a lot of, proof. Then, Robert Freke Gould came along and championed the authentic school. Their approach was simple. If you can't prove it with original documents and real evidence, it's just a myth, not history.
So this new, rigorous way of thinking needed a home base. Gould and his colleagues founded the Quattro Coronati Lodge in London. But here's the key. It wasn't a normal lodge for rituals. It was basically a research institute, a think tank, dedicated to finding the facts. It became the world headquarters for evidence-based Masonic history, and it still is.
And the team behind this whole movement was this amazing mix of people. You had Gould, the career soldier who'd seen the world. You had Sir Charles Warren, a general. And then you had guys like William Hewen, a total expert on the oldest Masonic documents. It was that combination of real-world military experience and hardcore academic brainpower that made their work so powerful.
So, okay, we've got a proper, fact-based approach to the history now. So how did this fraternity actually tag along with armies? The answer is a really simple but totally brilliant invention that basically made Masonic lodges portable.
It was called a traveling warrant. A normal lodge charter is tied to a specific building in a specific town. But this warrant, it was attached to a military unit, a regiment, a ship. That meant the lodge could officially open and meet absolutely anywhere that unit was, whether it was a battlefield in America or a port in India. It was a game changer.
And guess who came up with this genius idea? The Irish. Way back in 1732, the Grand Lodge of Ireland issued the very first traveling warrant, and the idea just took off like a rocket. By 1813, they had created nearly 200 of these regimental lodges, way more than the English or Scottish. They basically became the engine for spreading Freemasonry through the entire British military.
So you can think of these traveling lodges as kind of like Johnny Appleseeds for the fraternity. They were these little missionary units that planted the first seeds of Freemasonry in brand new territories all around the globe, long before any civilian lodges even existed there. Just look at the American Revolution. You had at least 10 of these so-called field lodges moving with the Continental Army. They were holding meetings in places like Valley Forge. And George Washington wasn't just a member in name only. He was there, he was visiting, he was even running the meetings sometimes. He used the lodge as a way to build unity and keep morale up among his officers.
And this one story just says it all. During the war, American troops capture the gear of a British regiment, and inside is their Masonic chest. Their charter, their ritual tools, the whole shebang. When Washington hears about it, he immediately orders it to be returned to the enemy, under a flag of truce with a guard of honor. His point was that Masons are supposed to be above the hatred of war.
And you see the same kind of thing happening across the British Empire.
In India, the Governor-General, a guy named Lord Moira, also happened to be the Masonic Grand Master. He saw the fraternity as a super useful tool. He used these military lodges to create a neutral ground whereas British officers could actually connect with local Indian leaders.
And this was not just a British thing. Get this. By 1811, Napoleon's army had 69 active military lodges. 69. It's believed Napoleon was a Mason, and we know for a fact that almost all of his top generals, his marshals, were high-ranking members. For them, it created a web of loyalty and a common culture for an army made up of guys from all over Europe.
But this gets to a really crucial point. These lodges weren't just social clubs for officers to hang out. They instilled a real ethical code. And sometimes that code resulted in these absolutely extraordinary acts of humanity, right in the middle of the most horrific battles you can imagine. And Robert Freke Gould, our historian, he tracked down the receipts, he documented these stories. At Waterloo, a French officer is about to finish off 9 wounded British soldiers. When one gives a Masonic sign of distress, the French officer spares all of them. You see it at Austerlitz, you even see it in the frozen hell of Napoleon's retreat from Russia. And maybe the most amazing one, on the American frontier, a Mohawk chief named Joseph Brant, who was a Mason, literally stops his warriors from torturing and executing an American officer. This is 100 years before the Geneva Conventions. For these guys, that shared bond was a kind of primitive international law.
So after the Napoleonic Wars wrap up in 1815, the world changes. The massive armies are broken up, and things get a bit more stable. The great age of the traveling lodge starts to fade away. But its influence didn't just disappear, it just changed shape. You can really see this evolution in a few clear stages. First, you have this period of explosive growth. Then it hits its absolute peak during the huge wars in America and Europe. After that, things shift. A lot of those traveling lodges just stopped traveling. They settled down and became the first permanent lodges in the colonies they helped create. Others turned into what are now called class lodges. You know, a specific lodge in a city like London that's just for members of the Army and Navy, for instance.
And this brings us right back around to Robert Freke Gould. His true legacy was taking this incredible, messy history, clearing away all the myths and legends, and proving with hard facts that these military lodges were a genuine, history-shaping force. He showed that they didn't just spread a social club around the world, they spread a set of ethics that had a real, tangible impact on how wars were fought.
So we end where we started, with the apron and the sword. And the whole story of military Freemasonry leaves us with a pretty challenging question for our own time. In a world that's still full of borders and conflicts and complex loyalties, how do we balance our duty to our own country or our own group with a bigger commitment to our shared humanity? It's the exact same question they were wrestling with on battlefields 200 years ago, and it's one that's just as urgent for us to figure out today.